Hi there, it's Lisa Starr coming to you again with another episode of StarrCast, the podcast. This week, we have two extremely busy people with me. I was lucky to nail them down, and we're going to discuss the topic of the design process in spas. What does that mean anyway, right? Because we all go to spas and they're beautiful and we expect to appreciate and enjoy the environment, but we don't put a lot of thought into how that all happened. When you look at the Global Wellness Institute numbers, the latest ones we have from 2020 are that there are 160,000 spas in the world, 160,000. In the US, we are the leader with 26,000, and that is split between day spas, hotel spas, cruise ship spas, medical spas. But day spas lead the way, followed closely by hotel spas. So when you walk into one of those 26,000 spas just in the US, do you ever think about, how did it come to be so beautiful and comfortable? Well, my guests here today are going to tell us exactly how that happened. I'm happy to be welcoming Tracy Lee, the founder and president of TLEE Spas, and Michael Lahm, VP and COO of TLEE Spas, both joining us today from different sides of the country. So welcome.
Thanks, Lisa. We're excited to be here.
So Tracy, I'm going to throw it to you first as the founder and namesake of TLEE Spas. Could you tell the listeners a little bit about how you came to be in your current role of a globally acclaimed spa designer? What was your pathway?
Thank you, Lisa. It's great to see you again and be talking to you again. And I will say the way I started off in this business actually has nothing to do really with where I am now. So
that's often the case.
Yeah. So, but the reason I got into this business to start with is I studied nutrition in college, and I wanted to take a year. I was thinking about going to medical school, and I wanted to take a year off, but didn't want to squander it. So I got a job as a nutritionist in a spa, in a large spa in Telluride, Colorado, and just quickly learned that I loved the setting. I loved the business of spas. And, I think somewhere in the back of my mind, I was starting to understand, how they operated and how they should be designed ultimately, but started off as a nutritionist.
That is such a great story, Tracy. I had no idea. My last year of the first 4 seasons of StarrCast were interviews with people about their journey into their current job. And no one was in a job where they thought they would be, when they left college. It's just really interesting how that happens. So you went in through the nutrition angle, saw that you liked the business model, and then you stayed. And tell us a little bit about, what happened after that.
Sure. So, kind of a funny story, which I won't tell you the whole story, but Oprah was one of my very first clients. And nice. So this was really I was like, this is kind of a fun business and really interesting. And, so I practiced nutrition for about a year and a half, and then eventually moved into sales, started managing the locker room, managing the scheduling desk, became the assistant spa director, and then was moved by my original company, Carefree Resorts, to manage a spa in Scottsdale, Arizona. And then one thing led to another, and that I worked for Golden Door Spas, and soon became, in the late 90s, I became the senior director for Golden Door Spas while they were considering expanding the brand. So I always found myself in a position of being asked to review floor plans. And, always initially kind of thought, wow, I'm a little out of my element here. This is definitely not something I studied. But I think, when you come up through the operation, you quickly realize what works and what doesn't work. And so, and I had a little bit of a knack for design. So that's how it started.
I love you saying you have a little bit of a knack for it. I think you have more than a little bit of a knack, but we'll get to that. So thank you for sharing that. I think it is really awesome to have designers who have worked in the spa. I mean, there's nothing like understanding the flow, right?
Sure.
Michael, tell us your story. How did you come to be in your position working with Tracy at the moment?
So equally sort of multifaceted. I would say really, my formative spa experience was in the 90s. I was starting working with Marcia Kilgore, the eventual founder of Bliss. Prior to that, she had a skincare studio. And I was sort of trying to find my way in the kind of post-recessionary 90s in New York. I started working in hospitality. I started seeing Marcia personally, and she was already cooking up her plans of moving out of, sort of a skincare studio, if you will, into a full-fledged day spa, which eventually became Bliss. And I was brought on really in an operational capacity as well. So really just learning the ropes through, a kind of tireless and incredibly visionary person. And,
For sure.
And this was pre-internet digital days. You learn by asking a lot of questions, contacts, phone books, things like that. And I was there for 3 years. And then after that, I was doing some consulting projects really by word of mouth, mostly kind of New York based or New York centric, because one of the things that, Bliss afforded me was a lot of contacts. Sort of everyone and anyone who was anyone was really coming through those doors. It was kind of a phenomenon at the time. I started wanting to do more in the development side. And I originally was, again, contacted through associations through Bliss. And several years into it, I realized I don't want to do this alone. There is power in collaboration. And so I sought out to kind of broaden my horizons and align myself with people that I wanted to really work with. And funnily enough, number one was Tracy Lee. So that began my stalking career for a couple of years. Tracy was great. We met, we got to know each other. We kind of dated before we married. I like to say that. And really started working. We were going to get involved on an auberge project, right, in the Caribbean, right before the recession of the 2008, 2009. And then, so we really started working together in earnest with the Edition Miami Beach around 2012. And then from that, started taking on more projects, more roles and responsibilities. And then in January of 2019, I became full-time to TLEE Spas as COO, and it's just been an amazing ride. So handle all aspects, but design is also very near and dear to my heart as well.
That's awesome. What a great story. It's great that you stalked her, of course.
Oh, I did. Yes. And I was remarking on it a couple of days ago with my partner, how, it's nice to look back, because I just remember looking and, seeing Tracy and just thinking, how smart and classy and talented she was. And I just feel so grateful to be like on this panel today, having a conversation, and we're, co-collaborating on all these amazing projects. It's incredibly rewarding.
It's great in life when you can envision something and then you make it happen, right?
I know. He's gonna make me cry here.
No tears yet.
No tears yet. But yeah, we had lots of iSpa dates where Michael would say, hey, can we meet? And I'd be like, oh man, I don't really have anything that we can work on together yet. But it was just a really nice friendship that developed. And, I remember the moment where the project came through my door and I went, this is the one we're going to work on together. And then it just took off from there. So
it's so great to have someone you can collaborate with. Totally. Yeah. So let's imagine the scenario that one of you receives an email from a prospect that says, I'm looking to create this new fabulous spa and wellness destination in a far-flung place. Walk us through the process of what happens next once you receive that email and you finish jumping up and down in excitement. What do you do then?
Well, that's, that happens often. So, I mean, and so that's definitely something that we can definitely speak from experience, but I'm going to pass it to Michael and let him, and then
sure. So, one of the things that I've learned over time that we typically do is to find sort of, do we have any kind of relationships in connections to this project, whether it's through ownership, brand, or the design team. So we try to kind of get more, start our due diligence process that way of finding out like what the scoop is. Sometimes we know a lot about a project on the front end. Sometimes it's more vague. And then we, I think Tracy and I are both, luckily that we're pretty well traveled. We sort of have an instinct around places, but it's really, if it's an existing property, if it's a renovation, obviously we're going to start looking at that. But I think it really starts with the project team. And then we start to really start thinking about the market that it's operating in and what makes sense for that. But the bottom line is really that kind of first part of due diligence is really getting prepared to kind of know what we're walking into as much as possible.
How much preparation do you have to do in advance of having maybe your first meeting with a client?
I think it depends on the nature of the project and the players. For projects that are just inherently more kind of familiar to us in terms of the sweet spot, let's call it a resort development, spa development within the resort context. We certainly spend a couple of hours before we'd like to get on a call for an interview because, the relationship piece is so critical. So trying to figure out how to establish those direct relationships as soon as possible. And then going into that with, being prepared in terms of, what to know about it, to what we can. But I also learned from Tracy very clearly, it's listening. It's really picking up cues on their vision, kind of what the vibe is, kind of trying to understand the project dynamics because they're all different. So it's really, I think, dialing in on kind of an interpersonal human level as much as it is in advanced research.
Are there
often
go ahead, Tracy.
I was going to say, oftentimes, Lisa, it really depends what stage the project is at, right? I mean, we have projects, we think that the best ones are the ones where we start from the very beginning, before there's anything on the land. And that's not just us, not just the spa consultants, but also the architects and the interior designers, just to start before anyone's put pen to paper. And so, but we're not always so lucky for that to happen, right? Oftentimes we come into a project and there's been plans developed and perhaps those plans are what allowed it to be financed and approved and entitled. And so sometimes we've got a lot of wiggle room and sometimes we don't have any at all. So I think to answer your question about how much preparation, it depends what stage the project is at. And so, but we always walk into a project having a very good handle on what's been designed so far, and then what are the comments that, I mean, we've got projects. Michael has a great experience recently in the last couple of years where he walked in, the place was under construction and he went, oh my gosh, there's 5 big things here that aren't going to work. And he developed so much trust with that client that they stopped construction and they moved walls. And because of some of those critical decisions, they're getting a lot of great press now. They're profitable. So
I know what project that was, and I'm going to come back to it later. But let me ask this. Do you ever get a phone call or have this initial meeting where you feel like, I'm not sure this is for us?
Yes, for sure. I mean, we obviously want to have an open mind. And sometimes I will say kind of preconceptions before much in the way of communication has happened, we have been proven wrong. So I will say that first as well. But yes, I mean, there are projects either that just don't really fall into kind of our sweet spot, which is, I think bigger picture, higher level projects, typically in either hospitality, club, or mixed use settings. We don't typically do freestanding day spas, but doesn't mean we wouldn't. And then I think things where we sort of start to feel like maybe we should take a pass, I just think it comes down to vision or lack thereof, or really no real project team or process in place. And we know that, it's just nothing particularly great is likely to come out of it. And that's when we sort of maybe, press on the brakes a little bit. And kind of, but yeah, I mean, it goes both ways. Sometimes things don't look so great at initial glance, and they turn out to be amazing, amazing end results.
So if you are not able to have that early conversation where you feel engagement, maybe you get someone that has a vision that's unrealistic, or the timeline is unrealistic, and you might say that won't reflect well on us, so we want to not go down that road, right?
Well, I think if you start to sense that the overall dynamics, and it can be in a lot of different ways, are just they don't feel like they're going to coalesce into something meaningful.
Mm-hmm.
At the end of the day, sometimes we take passes, for sure.
I think at our core, we are collaborators. I mean, that's just, we aren't the ones that are always leading the process. We're part of it. And so, we're interacting with designers, we're interacting with brands and engineers, landscape architects. And, I think we have a lot of experience working on teams, and it becomes pretty clear early on if there's missing ingredients. And so yeah. we had an interesting opportunity interview a few weeks ago, and I won't name any names, but we got on the call, and the client was talking about dance floors around pools, and a
Vegas meets Dubai, I remember.
A pool that it was a pool that was 6 acres big, and it was in the desert, and Michael and I just got off the phone. We were like, this just doesn't mesh with our values. And I think that's a really important part of, something we did a couple of years ago, Lisa, and we had not done this, we've just kind of been for a while there, we were just sort of seat of our pants, kind mm-hmm. of like knowing what we like to do, and knowing we worked well together, but we never sat down to really go, what are our values? What is our mission? And we always thought, we're a small company. Like we
don't need that, right?
Right. But I will say, since we took the time and made the investment in doing that, he and I are like, we know what we want to do, and we know immediately when we're on a call and it just isn't the right fit because it doesn't mesh with our values.
Well, time is the one thing we can't get back, right? So why waste it and waste the clients as well if it's not a good fit?
Yeah.
And you do have to be passionate about it. As you said, Tracy, you really eloquently described how you're one part of a very large team, especially on the kinds of projects that TLEE does, that are big developments with hospitality or F&B elements. So you're one part of a team, and you need to work well with that team.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, we sort of laugh. It's our job, kind of on the front end, is to gain trust and I just think collegiality, and to have some fun, because we're not curing cancer here. We're doing, we are in the lifestyle. And I just think it's just human nature. People do better work when they like and trust the people that they're working with.
Mm-hmm.
And that is just so abundantly clear, especially as I get older. It's just and understanding that sort of intuitively.
We find as we get older, we get a little choosier, don't we?
And discerning. Yeah.
Exactly. Discerning. That's a great word. Yeah. So you have the initial call, you feel like, yeah, this is great. We're excited about this. I mean, walk us through how you dive into the research supporting the project, because spas have treatment rooms, lounges, front desk areas, a lot of elements that are similar. And when you're looking at a pool of 60,000 globally hotel and resort spas, how do you make yours different? So how do you start to dig into that approach of creating something unique?
Michael, why don't I start and then you take it, take it from there. But, I think our major deliverable, Lisa, with every project that we work on is a concept deck. And I would like to come up with a better term for that, because every project has that. But I really feel like what we offer is it starts to, it's not just a lot of pretty pictures in the form of a PowerPoint or a PDF booklet, but it talks about the vision, and it talks about brand markers and key influences. And it's oftentimes a 50-page document that starts to tell the story and what is the philosophy, what is the foundation. And there's always a couple of pages in there that talk about, where we are in the world, whether it's New York City or Dorado Beach, Puerto Rico, or Los Cabos, and what are elements of the place and the history and the culture that are going to start to tell the story. And that's really, really important. I mean, we have this book, in some cases, in one case we called it a playbook when we did the Equinox Hudson Yards, the first Equinox hotel spa. We referred to it as a playbook because sports and fitness and all of that is a very big part of their story. And it really does become a playbook for the brand. And oftentimes I've seen with projects where these books, these concept decks, they serve a purpose early on, but we endeavor to make sure that ours stands the test of time throughout the life of the project. And so when these places open, more often than not, the marketing people that we're working with will say, oh, hey, I'd like to get the latest update on your book so that we can then take that copy and use it for our website and use it in our training documents and training materials. So yeah.
And I think just picking up on what Tracy said, and we our concepts don't kind of stay static, right? I mean, project timelines can be, especially in kind of ground up development, 3 to 5 years. We start with sort of our visioning deck, which is sort of our pre-concept, and it's kind of these big ideas that are informing largely big ideas and as they relate to facility and space planning. And then, that process of design can be 6 months, it can be 18 months. It really just depends on kind of the overall pace of the project, but things change over time. So our concepts then get layered as we get more intel and more stories and more kind of meat on the bone. So we are always adding to them and sometimes taking away so that they're living and breathing. They're not just delivered on the very front end, 3 to 5 years out from something that may be built in a very different way than it was originally envisioned. And, the whole industry and market has changed. So we try to kind of keep that fluid and not just put it all on the front end at the very onset, because so much changes over time.
Well, we've certainly seen that in the last few years, haven't we? I mean, projects that started in 2019 were in for a rude awakening by the time they came to fruition. So you do have to be flexible, but, in projects with such a long timeline and a big investment, you also don't have as much ability to maybe move walls and change concepts. So how do you work with that? When you have an idea and then the market changes, how do you pivot?
I think it really depends on what we were really staking ground on. I mean, sometimes it might need to be, I don't really think I have an example, Trace, in my head of anything that, that we designed pre-pandemic, for instance, that now feels, oh my God, really, out of date for whatever reason.
I will let I will say this doesn't exactly specifically answer your question, Lisa, but I will say that, we have been, this whole idea of being in the outdoors and connecting the architecture to the outdoors. I mean, this is something that we started doing so long ago, right? Like it was, going back to Esperanza with Auberge and Palmetto Bluff and Auberge du Soleil and Calistoga Ranch, those all had very strong outdoor elements that were incorporated into the design. And this goes back 20 years ago or so. So I would say that, like, specifically talking about the pandemic, we were, as this was happening, everybody was talking about like, oh, we need outdoor space. We're like, oh, every single one of our properties already has outdoor space, So I think that have been kind of leading the charge on some of those things. So that's not something specifically we needed to pivot on. But that's just one example of, I mean, I guess we were a little bit lucky and a little bit visionary.
Mm-hmm. I'm gonna piggyback onto that, for the real-time example of the project that we launched, the Lake House, upstate New York. And Tracy mentioned before that, they were set to launch essentially, and they admittedly kind of an afterthought amenity space, which oftentimes happens. This is not the first example of that. And he sent plans to me ahead of a site visit that Tracy mentioned. But not only had, just going there and articulating our ideas, but we looked at the plan and we kind of did a markup, just like what we would hope for, not knowing the state of construction.
And wait, Michael, why did he send you the plans if it was already built?
Because he knew it was subpar to what they wanted to achieve overall on the property. And I think he needed an external voice. This is, part of the ownership team.
Good for him.
To validate that. Yeah. And the same gentleman, so I went up and this was January 6th, 2021. Thank you very much. I flew out as the Capitol was being stormed. Strange time to go to a kickoff meeting. And I toured with him, and I wasn't aware of how far along it was, but I kind of used that time to say, hey, is this the time to talk? And he said, absolutely. That's why I flew you up here. And one of the big pieces that we kind of were questioning is why this property is on the Finger Lakes. It is stunning. It's all about kind of this northeastern wine region and kind of the inspiration from the mothership of California wine country. Well, how can we not have any outdoor space? No, it's not California. Yes, you have very cold winters, but it just seems to me, COVID or not, you're really missing an opportunity here. So in addition to halting the interior construction and ripping out pretty much everything that was there, I mean, it's not the most sustainable story we're ever going to tell, but it was also included developing an outdoor component to the spa with individual barrel saunas. That was also, selected because of the nature of the site. This is a very cold climate. We really wanted to kind of tap into Scandinavian bathing culture, but also we made a selection on these individual saunas rather than a communal thing because they can be booked as a separate experience.
Right.
So, great timing. We got the opportunity to do it. So yeah, things like that do happen, and was able to be implemented so quickly because, it was a private ownership and an independent property. I don't know if that would have happened in a more complicated branded environment.
So what kind of delay did it create in the ultimate opening, him engaging you and you making these changes?
Well, that's the other shocking thing because of, kind of being able to kind of react and mobilize very quickly. So that initial meeting going up to evaluate the current facility happened in October of 2020. And we completely redesigned, expanded, rethought the whole spa experience, and it launched Memorial Day of 2021, 6 months. I mean, that's, I still am amazed that, there was nothing available, right? The designer, the interior designer was brilliant. I mean, she just made it happen. So it was an incredibly ambitious, kind of timeline, especially during a pandemic, but it happened, which was amazing.
And I'm just gonna, sing Michael's praises here for a second in terms of, the role he plays on a design team. Extremely efficient, extremely responsive. Designers love to work with Michael and with TLEE spas because we always say this, and we even put it in our contracts, we will not slow down the process. We will only enhance the process and help to speed it up. You'll never be waiting on us, and so I think that that's really important. I mean, we have a big responsibility with these consulting jobs. I mean, ultimately, these are businesses and people are investing in developing a spa or a wellness offering. They're investing in us. And so, we highly prioritize making sure that we turn answers around and that we only enhance the process and don't slow it down.
That's a great commitment to make because you're right. A lot of money is being invested, and the sooner it opens, the sooner they can start making it back.
Yep.
So on that point about the financials, so, once you've got the design brief, are you involved with them helping with their financial projections? Is that part of what you do in your consulting?
Yes, absolutely. Sometimes, especially in brands, they may elect to kind of handle the pro forma piece in-house with their development team, but oftentimes we are developing pro formas as well. And we typically, it needs to be based off something, right? So kind of our first concept plan, it's one of the things I think that we're different in that we don't just hand over a program, a kind of spreadsheet of space and allocations, but because we have an incredible architect on our team, we kind of move the bar forward with concept design. So once we have an approved concept design, we can then obviously develop the financial projections. And as you said before, it's key to validating the business potential, obviously. And I guess as operators, and really coming from sort of more entrepreneurial backgrounds, it has to work financially for it to make sense. So, we're not going to go ahead and start proposing things that don't make sense in that respect.
Mm-hmm. I mean, I think, the fact that we both came up through through operations, we have worked for others and worked for brands and worked for individuals. Like we understand the business part of it too, and how important that is. We often boast that all of our spas are profitable. Every spa we've ever developed is profitable, some more than others, but we always have our eye on that for our clients, for sure. So
that's excellent. So back to that design component. So you're creating the spreadsheet that has, you need this many treatment rooms or this much fitness space.
House size, the locker rooms, all right, including the back of house, which is so key.
It is so key. We'll come back to that, but you don't just hand them a list of what they need. You also create a floor plan or a test fit of some sort.
We will, it can be as simple as test fit over, diagrammatic overlays, or we can actually do a full blown, plan and site planning, high level, conceptual, that then gets handed over to the respective disciplines. We've found that really speeds up the process, makes it more tangible for the decision makers, and to Tracy's point earlier, just like pushes the ball forward very quickly.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, we spent many years, Lisa, where we were trying to explain our ideas, and we do plan markups and that type of thing, and that's what most consultants do, and that worked well. It served us well for a long time, but we realized in the last couple of years that actually having someone on our team that can go, okay, I'm going to draw what you just told me, and then we can immediately show that to the client and see if we're on the right track. You save just a lot of time, and it helps to illustrate. Our picture is worth 1,000 words, right? I mean, that's just, and so it's working really nicely and really benefiting our clients, we've learned.
Well, sure. And speed to market, again, is much better. And when it's someone on your team, we've had plenty of issues as consultants over the years working with architects who had never done spas and who don't understand the ergonomics behind it or the flow required. So let's talk about that for a few minutes. If you're designing a spa and you have carte blanche, we have the typical layout. You enter at the lobby, there's some retail, there's maybe a nice view. You've got treatment pods, you have locker rooms, lounges. I mean, what is changing in that design, and how can you make it more modern? Have you seen any good trends lately?
Well, I think things that we're thinking about, whether they're trends or not, I sort of somewhat cautious with that word because, it has to stand the test of time. Again, going back to that value piece for the owners. I think really this notion of mental and spiritual wellness and having a facility that really kind of supports that type of experience. So thinking about places and, that are maybe flex, but they are kind of gathering venues for group classes, mind, body, sound healing, lectures, or even just like a place to just kind of go and meditate. So that's becoming more and more important, especially when we have the space to do something like that. It also creates a really unique opportunity to do something super out of the box, right? Other things for us is sort of really kind of sort of new ideas around salon components, because that is always a challenge for us from when, going back to that operational lens. We have just been through the experience that in a lot of resort markets, even though there may be a big wedding destination and a built-in demand for those services, they are incredibly difficult to staff.
So tough to staff that. Yeah.
And the revenues just really don't support the dedication of those resources, whether it's space and staff as well. So kind of hybrid examples where you can combine kind of some beauty and grooming pieces within the context of sort of express treatments, recovery services, sort of more like these hybrid kind of express areas, in addition to private treatment rooms for longer periods. And then I think on the opposite end of the spectrum, these really expanded group suites, group venues. We had in the Ritz Reserve Los Cabos, the spa has its own private casa privada, which means private house. It truly is its own spa within a spa, so that you are, because of a big high-end, celebrity market, wedding venue, things like that. So what makes sense to kind of different experiences that again are kind of financially or soundly based on business, but that change up the predictable sequence of what you just said. We're always looking at changing it up, but we want to make sure, I think the mode for us is multi-purpose. How can we use this in a lot of different ways?
Yeah. Lisa, I'll give you one example of, probably a project that is most near and dear to us is the Ritz-Carlton Reserve Dorado Beach in Puerto Rico, where we had the great fortune of working with such visionary owners. And it was one of those projects where it was, turnkey, as we call it, where we actually were standing on the land before there was anything there,
Wow.
with the design team, and the owners said, we've hired you to create something incredible. You tell us how big it should be. You tell us where on the site it should go. It was just
what a great opportunity.
It was such a great opportunity. But to your question about how do you mix it up and not make it just the predictable, here's your front desk and then locker rooms and so on, is we wanted to create something that was just that was a surprise, that when you walked in, it wasn't the front desk that you saw as the very first thing. And, obviously we had also the great fortune of working with a pretty healthy budget on this particular project. So not all projects have that, but with this one, we decided we wanted to create a portal, which ended up being a beautiful building, kind of almost like a monument, and it's about 40-foot high ceilings, incredible architecture. And the only thing that happens is you walk through it and it's botanicals, it's dried herbs, it's candles, it's like spiritual architecture, really. And I think it always surprises people that, like, oh, you're not selling me something in here, and you're not, but you're immediately, it's probably about, I think, Michael, 15 to 20 feet from the entry of the portal till you walk out, and then you start
a soaring kind of moving space, and really, a huge decompression zone. We like to try to incorporate those as well, and even in smaller environments, this one is just, kind of the ultimate expression of that.
We'll talk about setting the stage, right? I mean, you've provided a transition from the busy outside world to the spa without commerce. I love that.
Yeah, exactly. So we were fortunate. We don't always get to do that, and that doesn't always make sense, especially in urban locations and that kind of thing. But that was pretty special, and and people notice it, people remember it, and probably that ultimately, translates into higher spends and return visits and so on.
For sure. I liked your comment, Michael, also about the flexibility of space. I mean, you're right. You're in resorts where people do want to get their hair done, but oh boy, so hard to really accomplish that. But maybe you create the space for it and they bring in people from the outside for the day. Who knows? They just need flexible space. And we've seen that now we have this move to workshops and events and lectures and the Instagram wall and all these things that weren't a component of design 10 years ago.
Right.
Mm-hmm. Mhm.
Absolutely. I mean, owners are always talking about the Instagram wall. We know this, right? So it's certainly permeated all the way up. Yeah, and even all of our treatment rooms, we are really pretty big fans of, not assigning very specific types of services to specific types of rooms because, the world changes very quickly. These spaces have to be adaptive to what makes sense now, 5 years and 15, 20 years out. So we also think about it even in the specific treatment room environment.
Very true with the treatment rooms. I mean, having furniture and surroundings that can do any number of services makes a lot of sense financially. And we've just seen, things come and go, and you need to be able to flex with that over the life of the project. How long is a spa that you design and opens? How long should it be before it needs any renovation? What should the owner expect to get out of that initial creation?
Well, I think we have a pretty good perspective on this from one of our current projects, and it's a major one, which is the Grand Wailea in Maui. So just as a little backstory, that opened in the late 80s, early 90s. I think it's the early 90s, but it was the premier hydrothermal spa in the country, right? And at that time, I would say, or even kind of coming into the 90s, there was a lot of hotel spa construction, right? It's coming up on that time. So the Grand Wailea is basically, we are scooping out the entire inside of the spa. We're pushing it outside to the extent that we can from kind of land use and entitlements. And we are kind of re-engineering a very different type of hydrothermal experience that, will hopefully stand the test of time for the next 20, 30 years. From my perspective, and Tracy, I mean, I feel like 20 to 30 years, especially in places that have, conditions that are harsh, or depending on how they were built, there can be a lot of, underlying issues, plumbing, mechanical, that sort of thing. So I think it really depends on, but, I think 20 to 25 years is I think the typical life cycle.
Yeah. I mean, I think in terms of, adding spaces and moving walls, probably 20 to 30 years, but after 10 years, you need to start looking at some of your FF&E,
Yeah.
right?
Right.
Your paint and your soft goods and that kind of thing. But you hope that, if your consultants and your design team have made good decisions on your behalf, that, hopefully you don't have to move walls ever, really. We just are right now, the Aubert Spa at Esperanza is celebrating its 20th anniversary, and that we have at that location the same spa director that we started with. We have largely the same spa menu that we started with. We've added treatment rooms, but not really changed the design at all. And so, we keep using that term, stand the test of time, which is very much that we defined that as one of our values when we went through that exercise is, you don't want to create something that's just good for today or tomorrow or next year. You really want to be thinking about, making it, your support spaces have to be large enough and in the right areas to support, what you've designed and built, and probably what you might design and build next, so that you're not also having to add support spaces. And so it's all of that.
So you have to live in a world that's ahead of today, you two. I mean,
Sure.
You have to be thinking ahead. How do you do that? Like, what sorts of things do you read, follow when you travel? Like, where do you get your inspiration from to sort of see what's coming before we do, the rest of us?
Well, I'm going to start, I would say, because the fact that, I live in New York and Tracy lives in San Francisco does give us often a front row seat on kind of what's new and next. I mean, I saw it even in the 90s at Bliss, and there was nothing about wellness. That was not the story, but this crowd that it attracted, this sort of fashion and media crowd, they were already, the whole thing about nutrition and exercise and all these things. And that was the conversation. And I was thinking about this when I was putting a presentation together a couple of years ago. Like that was like the sort of precursor to the modern wellness movement. I saw it exploding in the recessionary, New York. All the stores were closing. Everything that was coming in its place was like healthy food concepts, boutique fitness, athleisure. So we get a lot of, we kind of see in our daily lives a lot what's going on. I know myself, I am insanely curious. I read a lot, and it's not oftentimes what I should be reading in terms of all of the the trade information, but I'm just really curious. I love design. I know Tracy does. I'm interested in fashion. I'm interested in so many other things. So I think being well-rounded is maybe as important as, having your kind of finger on the pulse of everything that is being talked about at the current time.
Yeah, and we both do travel a lot and love to travel, and are always looking, when we travel, we're looking through the lens of, what's happening out there. And it's not always like thinking about what's new and next, but what is tried and true too, right? What is, thinking about, spa and, spas are based on water concepts and bathing culture. And, how do we modernize that? So oftentimes we're not trying to come up with something brand new, never been done before, but how can we take what is just the rich history of spas and the spa culture and modernize it? And that often ends up being very successful.
I'm enjoying what we're seeing a little bit now in design, is that move, Tracy, to what you referenced, where spas began from bathing culture and communal bathing. Let's face it, in North America, homes didn't have toilets in them until the 1850s. We went to communal places to bathe, and the modern day spa went into this space of you alone in a treatment room with a provider, a very solitary experience, and all she and quiet. And we're coming back from that into something that's more communal, which I think has lots of exciting advantages that I hope we'll see.
Yeah, it's definitely moving from the me time to the we time. I think even in in lots of ways. And then the other thing that Tracy and I, when we travel, it's not like looking at every single spa, because that's quite frankly, that can get a little repetitive. It's looking, food and beverage is such a, the innovation that's constantly happening there, and there's such a natural fit, in terms of spa and wellness. So that it's outside oftentimes of kind of this narrow window that we operate in.
No, you're very right. I get a restaurant magazine that I get a lot of great ideas from, because I think the models are very similar for restaurant and spa. The client has an expectation, they might have a reservation, they want to get a meal or a treatment, but what's around it is also important. And then they go home, and how does that whole thing get managed? And I think restaurants can be much more innovative than we see on our side.
Well, and to that point, menus, right? There is hopefully this is shifting, and we are big, kind of instigators of this. I feel like, there was a time when more was better, more treatment rooms, more services. And then when you look at the kind of what we all want to go to now in terms of restaurants that have a real point of view, have something very kind of fresh and evolving and very not so heavy on the descriptions. I still don't understand why we're doing menus where you're kind of doing a play-by-play of the actual treatment sequence, as opposed to more of a kind of higher level.
How will you feel when you're finished? Not what we will do, right?
What's this will do to me, right?
Yeah, I just, so, that's something that we've totally taken inspiration from, from our experiences in dining and food.
And that analogy, comparing it with the restaurant world, Lisa, is we talk to our clients about that very thing all the time, is like, you don't want to be at the Cheesecake Factory of spas, right? Where you're like,
right. Next,
like, I want the French Laundry 1-pager. And because I want to know that you're going to be able to, you spa operator, spa manager, you're going to be able to execute on what you're promising me. And I can believe it if it's 1 page of amazing experiences, but if it's 20, I don't believe you anymore. I don't believe you to start with, right?
I can remember once, I think there was a spa around San Diego that had a 50-page treatment menu. This is probably 20 years ago. And I thought, dear God, where do you even start as a consumer? I mean, that's just too daunting to even dive into. I think we seek simplicity now. And I like this move towards more customization in the room, and just kind of tell us how much time you have, and then we'll take it from there.
And I also think it brings up the point of really celebrating the therapist. They are not order takers or like automatons. They're the best ones are healers. Give them the framework and the space to kind of create that magic, and not bog them down with 17 million protocols and product applications and kind of paint by numbers. I think it's just a really different paradigm. And given the staffing issue, and given what we're going through, and really the transformative experience that happens when you have that kind of hands-on treatment, I think we should really be celebrating that as much as possible.
Well, let me ask you the follow-up question then, Michael. How do you scale that? I mean, how do you scale something that doesn't have protocol and is kind of loosey-goosey?
Well, I think to your point, it's certainly dependent on the location, the management,
the brand, the size.
The size. You're not going to do that at the Grand Wailea Spa, 40 treatment rooms with and many, many millions. But where you are going to do that in these ultra luxury locations where you're hiring, a team of healers that can pull that off. The other thing that I think adds to that piece is this, especially in markets where there is a kind of prevailing wellness culture that seeks people go to, in their practices or with our clientele, of tapping into that and having kind of special programs or special offerings that may be here for a week or a month and gone, that kind of fresh appeal. So tapping into other people, you still want to elevate your staff therapist, but also bringing in unique modalities or kind of things to, to sort of keep fresh, but also validate and see kind of where we want to innovate.
I love that. Take a lesson from Target, right? You go into Target and you find some cute thing, try to go back 3 weeks later and find it. It's not there. I mean, they have trained us to buy it now, do it now, and we need to learn from that lesson as well.
Yeah, I would say so.
And I think, which, I think celebrating the practitioner and celebrating, the practitioner's strengths. I'm hoping that more spas, day spas, resort spas will start to adopt that mentality, because hopefully that word will get out to the healers or wannabe healers out in the world, because we have a real issue with labor right now. And, and I just wonder if part of that is trying to put these people in a box that aren't comfortable being in a box, so I think
that's a good point, Tracy. Maybe we need to have models that have some structure, but some freedom in them for that creation of special experiences. I mean, after all, that's how we build retention, is really connecting with the guest. So in closing, I'd love to hear from both of you about one of your favorite projects, aside from Dorado Beach, which sounds like the ultimate. Can you tell us about something you've created that you think is really special, and why?
You want to start, Michael?
I'm going to go back to the lake house example because, and that's the project that I mentioned that we launched last year, because of the fact that we were given such, like a big responsibility, but leeway and trust in doing it, and executing under really difficult circumstances, and coming up with a really strong, end user experience. I'm just really proud, because it was really challenging, and it was, because of time, because of COVID, because of, all the vendors were just starting to kind of wake up again. It was sort of like this perfect storm of everything aligned, and it really felt, it was a very personal project for me. I had a lot of interactions with media and, and even like the grand opening with the community. So it's sitting pretty close to my heart, and it's really our last launch, but it was full bore all the way for me on that one.
Well, obviously it was awesome, because it's been on the cover of everything I've looked at. I mean, it's gotten plenty of press. So kudos to you.
Well, thank you. And also to the client who has, very good PR and, well-funded marketing.
Lisa, for me, I think that, rather than just, I think about a lot of the Auberge projects. And when we were talking at the beginning about my pathway, I kind of stopped with Golden Door Spas, but really I would say the most significant part of my career before partnering with Michael with TLEE Spas was I was the vice president of spas development and operations for Auberge Resorts, and was brought on with that company before they had any spas. And so it was, I think the company was very, very visionary, very committed to spas and wellness being part of their brand pillar. And so I was responsible for Solage and Calistoga Ranch and Esperanza. And I think all of those projects are really special to me because the ownership and just the partners of Auberge Resorts, they wanted to do something special in every single location. And, they wanted it, they didn't want to do cookie cutter. So I learned very early on in my career that cookie cutter wasn't what I wanted to do. And, so being able to go into a location and go, how are we going to make this place special? How are we going to make it work with the brand, with the culture, with the climate, with the design team, and really make it sing. And so I feel like all of those Auberge spas are they're like kids to me. I can't really pick any favorite.
And they are highly acclaimed. So thank you again both for your time, Tracy Lee and Michael Lahm from TLEE Spas. Check out TLEESpas.com and you will see all of the amazing projects that Tracy and Michael have and are creating around the world. Thank you and keep up that great work.
Thank you, Lisa. Bye-bye.
Bye.